Hello for the 30th Sunday in Ordinary Time, using the first and third readings, um, Sirach 35, 12 to 14, and 16 to 18, and Luke 18, 9 to 14. I call this little homily Option for the Poor. Well, when we listen to the news or watch the news, we hear of inflation and high prices. We hear of $300 million ballrooms. We hear of tax breaks for the wealthy. We hear the professional athletes cheating and making tons of money on betting on sports. And we hear of tariffs all over the world. It's sort of rather depressing, but I think that's the feeling of today. Well, on people today. And we know that usually the wealthy, it's easier on the wealthy than it is on the poor. The poor feel it the most. We hear of wars, and the poor people and the children and the innocent people get killed the most, the greatest number of hurt. Well, I don't think that's the way our church is trying to set our mind and hearts. And so there is this term, option for the poor. It's very difficult to pull off. It's easy to say, but I think it's in the mind not only the Old Testament people, but the New Testament people under Jesus Christ. And in today's readings, we see two examples, one from the Old, one from the New. One from the Old Testament, the Lord is the God of justice in Syria. The Lord has no favorites. Maybe, maybe not. The Lord hears the cry of the oppressed. The prayer of the lowly pierces the crowds of the clouds. And I think that's what the church is trying to say still. It agrees with Sirach, a priest in the Old Testament, the option for the poor. But it doesn't seem to happen that way, does it? Well, what about Jesus Christ in the New Testament? Jesus Christ, presented by Luke, he preaches pretty much the same or even more. His parable that the Pharisee and the tax collector, the first one in the Old Testament was that other situation. In the New Testament, it's the Pharisee and a tax collector in the story. And the Pharisee goes into the temple and he prays. He prays and says, "Oh God, I thank you that I am not like the rest of humanity, greedy, dishonest, adulterous, or even that tax collector over there." What do you think of that? Does my prayer life resonate like that? I hope not. But the other example in the parable of Jesus Christ, and there was a tax collector. you're watching The Chosen, I think you probably like that Matthew, the tax collector. I learned to like him a lot more since watching The Chosen. But in this story of Jesus Christ, the parable, that tax collector over there in the temple, and Jesus says, well, the tax collector stood off at a distance and would not even raise his eyes to heaven. But he beat his breast and prayed, O God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And then Jesus says, well, I tell you, the latter one went home justified, not the Pharisee. I know this has been going on for ages, millennia, and it probably isn't going to stop. But the mind of Jesus and the mind of the message from the Old Testament still is basic to improving things. If we try to make good movement toward the poor, if we try to love our neighbor as ourselves, that we try to say, I'm sorry. We try to say, I forgive you. All of these are paramount in our attitudes if we're ever going to change things. And Jesus is probably the best, but he also gives the hardest. He preaches the ideal because he lived the ideal of coming into this world, sent by the Heavenly Father, and he did it. And he had compassion, and he had feelings for the poor. And it seemed as though he gave preference to the poor and the sick and the needy. Our world needs a little of that or a lot of that insight. And at least we continue to try to do it. So I like the church's read on this, the option for the poor. During these times, it seemed like upheaval and turmoil and a lot of depression that we need to look to the way of Jesus, which is the way that we were created to try to live in the image and likeness of God. What do you think about the option for the poor? I like it, but it certainly is a challenge. Have a good day.